rain had been relentless by the time Ethan took the night post at the shuttered weaving plant. He signed the sheet for cash and a week's pay up front. Rent and hospital bills didn't wait for courage. The mill stood on the town's edge, where streetlights faded. Looms hunched like ribs, conveyor belts sagged, and broken windows made the place toothy. Locals muttered that men walking those floors at night didn't come back the same. Ethan believed in money, not in stories. For hours, his shift was routine. Patrols, logbook entries, coffee gone cold, the radio's thin hiss. At 11:46, the main lights blinked and failed. Emergency lamps didn't kick on. The generator coughed once and died. His flashlight became the only reliable thing. On a greased steel column, someone had scratched into the grime, "Don't trust the light." The words felt like a new bruise. By the boiler, he found a cap floating in an oil-slick puddle, soaked and torn. The inside name tag ripped free. He remembered the missing man notice in the office. Harris, last seen on a night shift. Nearby mannequins stood in a row, aprons stained, faces wiped blank. One bore a handprint caked with grime. The plant answered his presence with a slow tapping. Tap, pause, tap, measured, patient. Corridors folded and looped as he walked. Doors opened onto walls. The beam of his torch hesitated at corners where shadows pooled, like things waiting for permission. On a concrete slab, 4 deep gouges spelled, "He didn't leave." The letters were a map, traced into his skin. A locker left ajar displayed a jacket. Harris, its pocket smeared. The mill smelled of iron, varnish, and something sweetened with antiseptic. He tried a nervous laugh, and it got lost in the rafters. In the dye room, an oily sheen broke, and a cap bobbed up like a small, unwilling raft. The radio spat static. A voice seemed to thread through. "Keep the light. Keep watching." He tried to think of pranks and drunks. The mill ignored his logic. When his beam crossed a crouched figure in a far corner, it rose with a slow, relearned motion. Too many teeth flashed. A roof bulb popped, and darkness collapsed around him like a pressed cloth. Something cold breathed at his ear. "Your shift begins now." He ran, corridors lengthening into a maze. Reaching the security hut, he found the logbook open. Someone had scrawled in a different hand, "No one believes the night." The words sat heavy on the page. He put his name beneath them, because the plant demanded a witness. Outside the window, a shape moved at the edge of the compound. Too patient to be wind, it tapped the glass with a sound like a loose coin. The generator kicked back to life, coaxing 3 distant bulbs into sour light. Against the far wall, caps and aprons gathered like a congregation. Mannequin heads crowned with work caps. Fabric hung like mourning shrouds. They watched him. On another round, he found a child's shoe, impaled on a spool of thread, and a quilt stitched from uniforms. Each square embroidered with a name: Harris, Riley, Clark. The stitches were tacky. The fabric smelled of bleach. It was an archive, not refuse. A journal lay in the press room, with pages full of names and times. The last entry dissolved into frantic scratches. "They took the light. Don't let them take yours." When he slid the journal beneath his jacket, the press room door slammed on its own. The plant felt like a thing that could choose to close its mouth. Back at the cabin, the logbook he'd left neat was now smeared. Across the margin, someone had written, "We don't let them go." He pressed the journal to his chest and realized the rule: watch, be watched, and keep the light burning. He thought of his daughter's cough and the landlord's final notice stuck to his door. Money had made this a tolerable risk. He pressed the journal to his chest like a cold talisman. The mill's sounds braided into a rhythm, a metallic breath, a long creak, a distant bell that tolled like a clock no one owned. The radio hiccuped, and in a seam of static, he thought he heard counting. Outside, a silhouette at the compound's edge tapped the glass, and the fogged outline smiled. He set the pen down, closing the logbook as rain blurred the compound lights into smeared coins. The knock sounded 3 times, precise, patient, then a long drag that could have been cloth or something else. In the black beyond the window, a voice, thin and threaded, said simply, "Your shift has just begun." Ethan didn't sleep that morning. He sat in his car until the rain stopped, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to forget the voice that had whispered through the fog. But the sound kept repeating in his head. Patient, deliberate, familiar. He told himself exhaustion could play tricks. Still, when he looked at his wristwatch, the glass was cracked and tiny flecks of thread clung to his sleeve, threads that smelled faintly of machine oil. The next night, he returned. The supervisor met him at the gate with a raised brow. "Didn't expect you back," the man said. "Most guards quit after a night here." Ethan forced a smile. "I don't run from stories." The supervisor shrugged, handed him the keys, and muttered, "Just remember, some stories don't like being ignored." Inside, the plant was quieter than memory. Even the air seemed slower. His flashlight carved thin tunnels through the dark, landing on rusted pipes and dangling cables that swayed like nooses. The logbook waited on the desk, still open where he'd left it. His last words, "Your shift has just begun," were underlined in a thick, wet streak of ink. But he hadn't written that. He walked the first corridor, whispering to himself to stay calm. The same walls, same stains. But now, each step sounded different, hollow, delayed, as if something else was walking a half step behind him. He turned sharply. Nothing, only a line of footprints glistening wet on the concrete, ending where he stood. At the dye room door, the air carried a chemical sweetness, stronger than before. The puddle from last night had dried into a dark crust, and across it, someone had written with chalk, "Keep it running." The words glowed faintly in his beam. Machines hummed somewhere deep within, though no power lights were on. He followed the noise. The looms moved by themselves, spindles turning, threads tightening and releasing like breathing lungs. A figure slumped between 2 machines, half wrapped in unfinished cloth. When Ethan pulled the fabric back, there was no face, only a hollow space stuffed with cotton and oil-soaked paper tags. One tag read, "Harris." Another read, "Ethan." The power flickered, and a speaker above him crackled alive. "Shift 2 commencing, all operators to stations." The voice was his own. He froze. The machines grew faster, spitting threads across the floor like veins of silver light. They tangled around his boots, tightening, pulling him toward the looms. He slashed the threads with his flashlight edge and stumbled free, heart hammering. As he ran toward the exit, a red warning bulb above the door began to spin. On the steel door, someone had scratched with nails. No exit during shift. He slammed against it anyway, but it didn't budge. The hum behind him turned rhythmic. Dozens of looms, now in perfect unison, pounding out a pulse that almost sounded like breath. In the control room, he yanked open the breaker panel. Every switch was welded in place, labeled with names: Harris, Riley, Clark, and the last one, freshly scratched, bore his name. His hand hovered over it. When he touched it, the machines stopped. Silence rushed in like water. Then, a whisper from the intercom. "Now you understand. We weave what remains." The factory lights surged once more. Every mannequin stood at its post, head tilted toward him, cloth pressed into hands, shaped like prayer. On the nearest mannequin's apron, fresh letters appeared, drawn in thick, dark thread. "Welcome, Ethan." He staggered backward, trembling. The looms began again, slower this time, deliberate, patient. From the spinning thread, he saw something forming on the fabric, a shape, an outline, his own. By dawn, the supervisor found the gate open, the lights still on, and the logbook closed neatly. The final line written inside: "Shift complete. Operator, Ethan Rowe." Below it, the same faint message that always followed, in an unfamiliar hand, ink still damp. "We keep what we make." And on the wall above the desk, pinned by a single nail, hung Ethan's security badge, woven entirely from thread. The rain hadn't stopped for days. Police sealed the factory and ruled Ethan's disappearance an accident. But no one dared enter after midnight. Weeks later, a new company purchased the property and hired another guard, a man named Paul Riker, ex-military, steady hands, skeptical of ghost stories. He laughed when the locals warned him, saying, "Machines don't haunt people. People haunt themselves." Paul's first night began like any other shift. Empty hallways, flickering lights, the low growl of thunder outside. The control room smelled of dust and old iron. He glanced at the logbook. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but there it was. Shift complete. Operator, Ethan Rowe. He frowned, tracing the words with his glove. The paper felt damp, as though freshly written. At 2:13 a.m., the security feed glitched. Every monitor flashed white, then static. When they cleared, Paul froze. The camera feeds showed movement in every section of the building. Mannequins shifting position, turning their heads toward the cameras, their blank cloth faces pressing closer to the lenses until the screens bled gray. "What the hell?" he muttered, tapping the console. He left the booth to check the floor. The moment he stepped inside, the hum began, slow, steady, mechanical, but it came from nowhere. The looms were still. The lights dimmed, and from the end of the hallway came a faint, dragging sound. He followed, flashlight trembling, every step echoing in that hollow factory like a heartbeat. He reached the dye room and stopped. A single loom stood running, weaving fabric by itself. The cloth unfurled across the floor, a thick black sheet shimmering under the flashlight. When Paul knelt to touch it, he realized it wasn't fabric. It was hair. Long, coarse, tangled hair, woven into a human shape. The whisper came then, through the speaker above. Shift 3 commencing. His blood turned cold. "Who's there?" he shouted. The voice replied, "Paul Riker." Operator confirmed. The loom began weaving again, faster, tighter. Threads coiled toward his boots like snakes. Wrapping his legs, crawling higher, he tried cutting them, but every strand that broke revealed another beneath, pulsing faintly, like veins. He screamed and tore free, sprinting for the door. The exit was open now. A mistake, maybe. But when he reached it, the outside world looked wrong. The parking lot stretched endlessly, swallowed by fog. Behind him, footsteps followed. He turned and saw Ethan standing there, or what was left of him. His face a lattice of stitched fabric, mouth sealed by thread, eyes faintly glowing beneath layers of cloth. Ethan raised one hand, pointing to the factory. The looms thundered to life again. "Finish the shift," the voice said, overlapping both of theirs. Paul stumbled backward into the fog, screaming, but the mist swallowed every sound. When the morning came, the factory stood silent once more. Weeks later, workers removing old equipment found the walls lined with a new kind of fabric, dense, almost human in texture. Each roll bore a stitched tag, a name, a date, and a single word: operator. Among them were Harris, Ethan, and Paul. The factory remains closed today. Locals claim you can still see the windows glowing before dawn, the shadows moving behind them like workers on endless shifts. Some nights, a voice hums through the fog, steady, mechanical, patient. Shift never ends. If you were on duty there, would you stay till morning, or would you try to run? Now your turn. Comment below. What would you do if you heard your own voice whisper, "Shift commencing in the dark"?